Any health-related information on the following show provides general information only. Content presented on any show, by any host, or by any guest should not be substituted for a doctor's advice. Always consult your physician before you begin any new diet, exercise, or training program. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Welcome to Healing Ties on the Whole Care Network. On Healing Ties, we're creating a life to love after caregiving ends by sharing stories and resources and being with awesome people like you. Now that caregiving has ended, let the Healing Ties begin. Here's your host, Chris McClellan, the Bow Tie Guy.
Okay, greetings everyone. It's Chris McClellan, the Bow Tie Guy, for another episode of Healing Ties. Thanks for joining me today. Certainly want to send out a hello and a shout out to all of our friends in the UK on ukhealthradio.com. Thank you for joining me today, and thank you for all your support and suggestions on the show. I really appreciate your feedback. And today, goodness, especially in the United States, we've had a lot of storms here recently, and my guest today is Caroline Blazovsky. Caroline, did I do that okay with your last name?
You did it great. You did it perfect.
Right. You know, I'm so conscious about last names because my last name can be kind of difficult to pronounce, but you're America's healthy home expert, and you've been doing this for over 17 years, and I appreciate you taking some time off your busy schedule to chat with me today. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about your background and your company, and we're going to get into really what it's all about to make a home healthy.
Well, basically, I started a career 20 years ago working with physicians and homeowners to help create healthier living spaces. And that included things like mold, but branched out into analyzing homes for chemicals and radon and pet dander and all sorts of proteins. So it's really advanced throughout the years, and we've really come to understand that the way we build and how we live impacts our wellness.
And I think it's interesting that we're having this conversation today because I just hung up with a really wonderful financial planner in St. Louis who had moved her mom in with her and their mom put all their belongings in storage. And when they went to retrieve all her belongings, 2 months worth of mold had accumulated on her belongings in a storage shed. And I would imagine mold is one of the biggest issues that you end up dealing with.
And mold, because of the climate change that we're seeing and because of the storms that you talk about and the intensity of rain and wind, we see these potentials for moisture and, of course, for mold growth to happen. And what's interesting, I think, for the listeners to understand is what molds are, and I like to explain how they work because they're kind of fascinating. Mm-hmm. They're kind of fascinating creatures. Mm-hmm. They have the ability to do a lot of different things, and because they have these what I call secret abilities, they can really make us sick and wreak havoc on our immune systems. So molds do three things. They are that fuzzy thing you see growing on a piece of fruit or in the shower, and that's a spore. And that spore contains what we call a beta-glucan, or also a protein that can cause an allergic reaction in a percentage of the population. That's the first thing. Okay. So the mold has the ability to be an allergen. The second thing that molds can do is they produce a gas, and it's called an M like Mary, and then VOC. This VOC is similar to paints. You often hear people talk about low VOC paint or low VOC this or caulk or whatever. And when they talk about these things, they're talking about a gas or a chemical. Well, molds produce that gas or chemical as well. Thirdly, if you have certain types of mold, and those are what we call the toxic molds or the water damage indicators, those molds produce mycotoxin. And mycotoxins are known to cause everything from cancer to autoimmune disease to a lot of different symptoms that just, overall suppress the immune system. And certain people, believe it or not, based on your DNA, don't have the ability to detox molds and mycotoxins, and then they can get really sick when they're exposed to them.
Oh, goodness. That's something that I would not have thought of. how the immune system impacts, but it certainly does make sense. But how can it, with all the storms that are going on that have happened here recently, especially in the United States with the hurricane, and I understand you're still working with a lot of the problems in Houston. So what is your advice right now for folks that are dealing with a lot of water damage as it relates to the storms?
Well, it's not just storms. It's also climate and weather differentials that we haven't seen. And over the last 5 years as an environmental consultant, we've seen a lot of changes that have happened and just in the weather pattern. So it's really important. One of the most important things that I tell my clients and my listening audience, wherever I am, talking about, how to have a healthy home and why it's important to improve wellness through your home, is I talk about relative humidity, and that's controlling moisture within the home. And when you control moisture, you basically allow not only molds not to form, but also dust mites, dander. All of these things live microbiologically on moisture. So for example, if you have a lot of moisture, you'll have more bugs. If you have a lot of moisture, you'll be prone to have dust mites. If you have a lot of moisture, you'll be prone to have mold. So by monitoring your relative humidity in your home, you're basically helping to eliminate these sources and also make your home healthier.
And I guess that's an important thing, not only for a current homeowner, but if you're looking at purchasing a home, how to keep those the mold levels low. And for me, I've always struggled understanding how a humidifier works, but I think you've just explained in a very clear term that I certainly would help people understand why it's important to use.
Right. So you have two things, right? You have a dehumidifier, which helps remove humidity, and then you have also a humidifier, which adds humidity. And to be honest, my level that I like to see people is between 30 and 50%. And people say, okay, well, how do I achieve that? Well, how do I know what my relative humidity is? And what's really simple and easy to do is you go down into or go to a local hardware store, and you're going to pick up a relative humidity monitor. And it's a little monitor. You don't want to spend a lot of money, maybe, $10 to $15. And basically what you're going to do is you're going to measure the relative humidity in your home. If you're above 30 to 50%, or you're below 30 or above 50, you're going to have to either dehumidify or add humidity back in. And so if you can stay within this 30 to 50% range, you're going to be less prone to bugs, dust mites, mold, as we talked about, and your home's going to be a lot healthier. So real simple, just go to a hardware store, say, I'm looking for something that measures temperature and relative humidity. Don't spend a lot of money, bring it home and start looking at your relative humidity. If your level is high, particularly in basements and crawl spaces and things like that, you're going to get a dehumidifier to help bring that level down.
So would those numbers be consistent depending on the part of the country that you live in? For instance, I live 4 miles from the ocean, so it's pretty damp here in Florida most of the time. But if I'm out in, say, Palm Springs, California, where there's very little humidity, would the ratios be a little bit different depending on what part of the country you're in?
They are, but believe it or not, we have these issues regardless of whether you live in Arizona, the desert. This seems to be across the board problem. And because of, I think you may have heard about the recent storms that they had in the Phoenix area because they had a hurricane come in. So that presents a lot of moisture and rain that they're not used to having, which causes flooding. So the way we're building nowadays, we've tightened building envelopes so much and made them energy efficient, which is great, right? You think about, I don't have to run my air conditioning as much. It cuts my energy bill, which is fantastic. But what happens is when the air conditioning is not coming on as frequently, the relative humidity is able to rise, because what the secondary effect of obviously cooling a space with air conditioning is that you also remove relative humidity. But when the air conditioning isn't kicking on because of energy efficiency, now we get these moisture levels that start to rise in a home, and they come off different sources. We breathe out moisture, we cook, maybe we take showers, we bathe. All of that will raise the relative humidity in a house. And if you don't have a way to remove it and the house is really energy efficient and airtight, you're potentially at risk for mold problems. And that's what we've seen across the country.
It's so important to be educated in these important components that we don't often think about on a daily basis. But goodness, Carolyn, what are some of the hidden hazards in homes?
Well, I always tell my customers and clients that I work with, it's really important to test for mold is first and foremost. Secondly, you always want to test your water. And those are two things. If you're purchasing a home, say you're going into a real estate transaction, you always want to look for these things because they're not easily fixed once you're in that environment. So you'd want to know prior to going into a purchase of a house if you have a mold issue, because it could be expensive on the back end if you don't test for it. Also, water. If you have contaminated water, this is not something that's easily fixed, and you may not want the house if you don't test for water. So those are things that I've always are sort of my staples. Other things, we test for are things like VOCs, which are your chemical levels, especially if you've developed, any kind of illness where you go to the doctor, they're not really sure what's going on. You do all your tests, everything comes back okay, and you're still not feeling well. That's the important time to investigate your home. We see way too many people in my profession where they develop serious illness, and if they would have checked their home prior, they could have eliminated some of these bucket fillers, what I call bucket fillers, that have precipitated them getting sick. So your body's like a bucket. You want to basically make sure that you're not over-toxifying your body and that you're checking things like mold and how many chemicals you're exposed to and pesticides and dander and things like that, which all sort of lead to inflammation in the body.
How often should somebody be checking mold in their house? Is this something that should be done on a monthly basis? So, what are the guidelines for people to ensure that their house is healthy?
Well, I like to have people check one thing a year and check something different every year. So maybe one year you'll do a mold test, and then the next year you'll maybe do a VOC test, and then the following year you'll test your water. And then there's only, you get to do like maybe 5 tests, and then you'll repeat them. So like a mold test should be done every 3 years. And if you haven't done, evolved organics test or formaldehyde test, those are really important things to look at because we know that formaldehyde is one of the cancer causers that was listed.
Yes.
They did a report for the president back in 2009, and they put the best physicians on the issue of cancer. And they said, okay, well, what do we think causes cancer? And we came up with a lot of possibilities. And some of those were water treatment. So that's like your chlorination byproducts. Some of them were formaldehyde. Some of them were testing that you have, radiological testing that you have in at a medical facility. So the things that we can test for in the home, we do. And that's why I think it's important to sort of, once a year do a test on your home just to kind of assess where the health is of your environment. Because we know it plays into wellness more than we realize. I think in my profession, 85% of a lot of reasons people are sick are from the environment.
And I think I might have shared this story with you before in one of our previous conversations, but my partner, Richard, who had passed away from esophageal cancer in 2014, and he worked in a small shop in Manhattan for a number of years in the textile business. They made sweaters, and there was 6 people on staff, and 4 of the 6 had passed away from one form of cancer or another. And after he had been diagnosed, we talked out loud. We often wondered if his environment did not play a role in the cancer, especially since 3 of his other coworkers were also stricken with cancer.
Absolutely, and I believe. I mean, this is a personal philosophy, and I'm not a medical doctor, and I always preface that. But I've seen a lot of different things over the 20 years that I've experienced, and I've investigated a lot of homes, and I find that when people have 3 or more, what I call the trifecta, 3 or more contaminants or major players that are contributing to inflammation in the body. So for example, say you have mold in your home and you also have a lot of a high level of chemicals in your home, and then you also spray pesticide. There's much higher chance that there's someone in that home that has an illness. And usually when you have these trifectas going on, and they can be different things. It could be radon with a combination of pesticide, with a combination of high dander. But those combinations of things seem to lower the body's ability to fend off disease, and there'll be someone prone to getting some sort of ailment in the home.
It's almost like mixing up a witch's brew that is not healthy for you when all those combinations really hit at the same time.
It's like a cocktail.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that I've been in a lot of cases too where we have had people with serious illnesses and things like cancer and other diseases. And when we reduce these combinations, they've gone into remission. Now, can we say that it's because of what we did? I mean, obviously science hasn't gotten us to that place, but I've worked enough where I see that you lessen that load on the body, it's going to have a positive effect. It's not going to have a negative effect, and it allows the body to function, I believe, much more effectively.
And I guess another question that comes to mind here is I'm thinking about what I know what I have underneath my sink, all the different sprays and repellents, and is there would a garage be a better place to be storing pesticides and what is the best location to store some of these chemicals that all of us use on a regular basis?
But you bring up a really good point. So people often think, let's store in the garage. But if your garage is attached to your home, it's part of that living space and it shares air quality, which means that anything you're storing in your garage becomes part of your living space. And that's the problem we have a lot when we test for chemicals in the home. A lot of people exceed healthy levels because they're sleeping over a garage or the garage is attached to the kitchen. So the best thing to do is to store in a shed or an outside detached garage. If you have to store something in the garage, you can also put a ventilation system on your garage with a fan. In Canada, they've seen a lot of correlations between car exhaust and obviously petroleum products and things like toluene and benzene, and these things have the potential to be carcinogenic, and they see a lot of correlation between cancer. So they've gone to having ventilation systems in garages and also using more detached garages because of the fact that the cancer risk is so high from, when you start your car up in your house, you're exposing yourself to all those automobile fumes and they, permeate your furniture and come into your living space. Mm-hmm. So it's really not the thing. So, knowing what I know, I have a nice car, but it stays outside where it belongs in my book. It doesn't go in my house.
Very, very good. Goodness. Well, goodness, this is going by quickly. I hate this, but we've just got a couple of minutes left, Caroline. But I guess one of the other thing I wanted to ask you before we get all your contact information is if you had one or two words of advice for somebody who kind of like myself, who really knows nothing about this topic, making your home healthy, what would you tell somebody like me?
I would tell you first that, like you said, everything that you bring into your home outgasses something. So you don't want to be storing a lot of personal care products and fragrances and chemicals and bacterial wipes. And all of these things show up when I do an air sample in a home. So when I go in to investigate, I can tell exactly what you're using in your home. So don't store a lot. Try to use less fragrance because those are unnecessary volatiles that you need. You can have shampoo, but don't store 6 bottles. Definitely don't keep paint cans. Paint cans continue to outgas paint for, 18 months. And if you have a paint can that's closed and it just continues to, it's still liquid paint inside the can, that will continue to outgas indefinitely. So those types of things, don't store things like that in the home because they really contribute to creating a toxic environment. Also, if you're going to invest in things like a great vacuum is something people always say, I don't want to spend a lot on a vacuum, but it's really important because it helps you keep down dander. A HEPA filter on your vacuum is very important. You want to make sure you're vacuuming the number of people you have in your house. So for example, if you have 5 people living in the house, you're going to be vacuuming 5 times a week. If you have 2 people living in the house, you're going to vacuum 2 times a week. That's all to keep dander down. And dander causes inflammation.
Wow, that is it. I get that. I would never have thought of that. That's why it's important to talk to a professional like yourself. Goodness.
More work for you, right?
More
people like.
but healthy work. But goodness, I think we should do a whole series on this and on this, Caroline, because it's often. I'm using me as an example. You don't think about these things until after there's a problem, and we want to be proactive in our health and well-being, and looking at creating a healthy house is one way of doing that. So goodness, you have an open mic on the Whole Care Network.
Thank you. That's my job, is to educate people, and it's preventive. Right, medicine. We don't want to get to the point that we're looking at a problem. We want to look at it like, what can we do to help reduce just healthcare costs? I mean, if people simply did these things, how much we would improve just what we're spending on healthcare in the United States. I mean, it would be significant. And these aren't hard changes to make. It's just that people don't know to make them. You don't think about it until you're educated about it. And that's my job. It's to educate you, to get you thinking and say, look, it might be beneficial to make these changes. You're going to improve maybe asthma condition, maybe you're going to improve an autoimmune condition, maybe you're going to improve a cancer condition, but you're going to make positive changes.
What a delightful conversation with Carolyn today. Goodness, a lot of education, a lot of things to think about as we store chemicals in our home. I know I've looked underneath my sink to see what could be there that may not be good for my own personal health and well-being. For further information about all the great work that Carolyn is doing, visit her website at healthyhomeexpert.com. That's healthyhomeexpert.com. Well, that does it for this episode of Healing Ties. As you know, I'm Chris McClellan, the Bow Tie Guy. I'm creating a life to love after caregiving ends through radio, writing, travel, advocacy, and being with awesome people like Carolyn Blazovsky. Healing Ties is a part of the Whole Care Network. Check us out online at thewholecarenetwork.com, where you can see all of our show hosts, and especially our new podcast, Real Men, featuring Kyle Woody from Jack's Caregiving Coalition. So, make it a great day, everyone. See you for another episode of Healing Ties real soon. Bye-bye.